There are 7 plants that have been studied specifically for their effect on peripheral nerves. And I want to talk about them today because what the research shows is remarkable. But before I get to those 7 plants, I need to tell you something that most people in your situation have never been told. Something that explains why you've been suffering longer than you should, and why the relief you may have felt from certain natural remedies has always been temporary. If you're over 60 and your feet burn at night, if you feel those sharp electric shocks shooting through your toes without warning, if you've started holding onto walls when you walk, you already know something is seriously wrong. And you probably already know that your doctor hasn't given you a real answer. In my years working with patients over 60, I've seen this pattern over and over. Someone comes in after months, sometimes years, of that burning sensation in the feet. They've tried various herbs, teas, plant extracts, and some of them, yes, they've noticed some relief. A few hours of reduced burning, a slightly better night's sleep, and they cling to that. Because anything is better than nothing. And here's the thing. There's actually a real biological reason why certain plants create that temporary relief. Several of them contain compounds that activate specific nerve receptors and temporarily modulate pain signaling. Some reduce surface inflammation, some have mild antioxidant properties that give your nerve cells a brief window of lower oxidative stress. That's real. That's not placebo. The plants are doing something, but here's what nobody is telling you. That relief, 3 hours, maybe 4, is happening at the surface level, while underneath the actual damage to your peripheral nervous system continues. The root mechanism goes untouched. And every morning you wake up, that burning comes back, usually worse than before because you've gone hours without addressing what's actually destroying your nerves. Stay with me, because in just a few minutes I'm going to explain exactly what that mechanism is, why those 7 plants are genuinely important, and what needs to happen alongside them for any of this to produce lasting change. This is one of the most important things I can share with you today. Let me describe your situation as I've seen it in my practice. And I want you to tell me if this sounds familiar. You wake up at 2, maybe 3 in the morning. Your feet feel like they're on fire. Not warm, on fire. You put them on the cold floor, and for a moment there's relief, but the burning returns. You can't find a comfortable position. The sheet touching the top of your foot feels like sandpaper, and you lie there in the dark wondering if this is going to be your life from now on. During the day, it's different but not better. You walk carefully. You've noticed that you don't always know exactly where your feet are. There's a disconnection, like the floor is slightly further away than it should be. You've grabbed a wall to steady yourself, you've stumbled over a rug that wasn't even in your way, and you've started avoiding certain situations. The grandchildren's birthday party where everyone is on the floor, the walk on the beach you used to love, the dancing that once made you feel alive, and the pain. It's not just in your feet, it's in the back of your mind every single day. You're watching your own body and asking, how much worse does this get? Because you've already noticed the progression. 3 years ago, it was just occasional tingling. 2 years ago, it was the burning. Now it's balance problems. You're doing the math, and the math is frightening. This is not your fault. Nobody told you what was actually happening inside your nervous system. And the medical system, with its 10-minute appointments and its prescription pad, has almost certainly not given you a real explanation. What most doctors won't tell you in a 10-minute appointment is that peripheral neuropathy is not simply a disease. It is the endpoint of a long biological process. A process that has very specific drivers and that responds to very specific interventions when you target the right mechanisms. If what I'm sharing today is new to you, and I suspect it is, make sure you subscribe to this channel. I release critical health information for people over 60 every week. Information your doctor may not have time to share in a routine appointment. Hit the subscribe button below. It costs nothing, and it could be one of the most important health decisions you make today. Now let me explain what is actually happening inside your body. And this is where the research gets really surprising, and where most people, including many physicians, have a fundamental misunderstanding of what peripheral neuropathy actually is. Think of your peripheral nerves as electrical cables that run from your spinal cord to every corner of your body. Each one of those cables is wrapped in a protective layer called myelin. Myelin is not optional, it is the insulation. Without it, the electrical signal, the message that travels from your foot to your brain saying, this is warm, this is pressure, you are balanced, that signal leaks, it distorts. Sometimes it doesn't arrive at all, and sometimes it fires spontaneously, without any physical trigger. That is what you feel as burning, as electric shocks, as numbness, as the sensation of walking on cotton when the floor beneath you is perfectly solid. Now here is what the research increasingly shows. and what most doctors simply don't have time to explain. The myelin sheath does not deteriorate randomly. It deteriorates when the body lacks specific compounds that are required to build and maintain it. And after the age of 60, three things happen simultaneously that create what I call a perfect storm for nerve damage. First, the stomach's ability to absorb vitamin B12 drops dramatically. Not slightly, dramatically. The cells in your stomach lining that produce intrinsic factor, the protein that allows B12 to be absorbed, become less efficient with age. And B12 is not just helpful for nerve health. It is structurally essential for myelin production. Without adequate B12, and I mean the specific form that actually enters nerve tissue, the myelin sheath cannot be maintained. It begins to break down, and this happens slowly, silently, over years before you ever feel a symptom. Second, systemic inflammation increases with age. Low-grade chronic inflammation that doesn't feel like inflammation, no fever, no obvious swelling, but that silently attacks the small blood vessels that feed your peripheral nerves. Your nerves need constant blood supply to survive. When those tiny vessels are inflamed and narrowed, the nerves are literally being starved. And nerve tissue, when it's starved long enough, begins to die. Third, oxidative stress accumulates at the cellular level for decades. Every cell in your body produces waste products called free radicals as part of normal metabolism. In a young body, antioxidant systems neutralize them efficiently. After 60, that system is less effective. Free radicals accumulate inside nerve cells, damaging the mitochondria, the energy factories, that the nerves need to function and repair themselves. It's like trying to run a car on a battery that's slowly dying. The car keeps running, but not well, and eventually it doesn't run at all. And if you have diabetes or prediabetes, which affects nearly half of American adults over 60, many of whom don't know it, there is a fourth mechanism. Elevated glucose damages the walls of the capillaries that supply nerve tissue. Even slightly elevated blood sugar, sustained over years, creates what researchers call microvascular damage. Your nerves lose their blood supply, millimeter by millimeter, year by year. This is why 60 to 70% of people with diabetes develop peripheral neuropathy, not because of the disease itself directly, but because of what sustained glucose elevation does to the vascular infrastructure that keeps nerves alive. Researchers have published findings on these mechanisms for decades. What's remarkable, and what most people in the medical community have largely ignored, is the growing body of evidence suggesting that the peripheral nervous system has a meaningful capacity to begin recovering when given the specific nutritional support it has been lacking. Not in every case, not instantly, but the research is far more encouraging than what you'll hear in most clinical settings. The problem is that this research doesn't translate into prescriptions, and the medical system, as well-intentioned as it is built around prescriptions. I had a patient, I'll call him Richard, 71 years old, retired postal worker, came to me after 4 years of what he described as fire ants living in both feet. He had been on gabapentin for 2 of those years. It had taken the edge off. Maybe 30%, he said. But it had also left him foggy, unsteady, and dependent on a medication he'd never planned to take. He had gained weight. His wife had mentioned he seemed somewhere else most of the time, and the burning, even on the medication, was still disrupting his sleep 3 or 4 nights a week. When I tested Richard's B12 levels, they were critically low, despite the fact that he ate meat regularly and took a standard multivitamin. The form of B12 in that multivitamin was cyanocobalamin, the synthetic form, which does not effectively penetrate nerve tissue. He had been supplementing for years, and his nerves had remained deficient the entire time. We addressed his specific nutritional deficiencies in targeted forms. We supported the anti-inflammatory pathways. We gave his nerve cells the antioxidant support they had been missing. 6 months later, Richard told me he had slept through the night for the first time in 3 years. He wasn't pain-free, but he was different. His balance had improved measurably. He had stopped using the wall. Now let me be direct about something. I've watched patients suffer for years from something that could have been meaningfully addressed sooner. Not because cures exist that are being hidden from them, but because the specific mechanisms of nerve damage require specific nutritional interventions. And those interventions are almost never discussed in the standard medical appointment. And in the meantime, people are suffering. This isn't just about burning feet. I want you to understand the full scope of what peripheral neuropathy does to a person's life, because the physical symptoms are only part of the story. Think about what it does to your sleep. You cannot sleep when your feet are on fire, and when you cannot sleep, everything deteriorates. Your cognitive function, your mood, your immune response, your pain tolerance actually decreases with sleep deprivation, meaning the less you sleep, the worse the pain feels, which means you sleep even less. It is a spiral. I've seen it destroy people's quality of life more comprehensively than the original diagnosis. Think about what it does to your confidence. You've started watching the floor when you walk. You've started measuring distances to the nearest wall or railing before you move through a room. You've probably stopped mentioning it to your family because you don't want to worry them, or because you're not ready to hear them suggest that maybe it's time for some help around the house. That conversation terrifies you more than the pain itself. Think about what it does to your identity, the things that made you feel like yourself. The garden, the Saturday morning walks, the dancing at weddings, kneeling down to play with the grandchildren. Those things have become complicated. Some of them you've already quietly given up. And there is a grief in that, a real grief that nobody in a medical setting ever addresses. And think about what you know is coming if this continues on its current trajectory. I'm not saying this to frighten you. I'm saying it because you've already thought about it at 3 in the morning. The balance problem's getting worse. The falls. Neuropathy is the #1 risk factor for falls in adults over 65. And falls are the leading cause of accidental death in that age group. You know this. You feel it when you walk. The instability that wasn't there 5 years ago. The awareness that your body is not responding the way it used to. The link in the description below takes you directly to the natural nerve support formula I recommend to my patients. It combines everything I've covered today in the specific forms that actually reach nerve tissue. Take a look when you have a moment. I think it will make a lot of sense after what you just learned. Now let me tell you about the compounds that the research consistently identifies as meaningful for nerve support. WAMP Mankata, and why the specific form of each one matters enormously. The most important nutrient for peripheral nerve health is methylcobalamin, the methylated form of vitamin B12, not cyanocobalamin, which is what you find in most cheap supplements and standard multivitamins. Cyanocobalamin must be converted by the body before it can enter nerve tissue, and after 60, that conversion is inefficient. Methylcobalamin crosses directly into nerve cells and participates in myelin synthesis. The research on methylcobalamin is extensive. It's been studied specifically for its role in nerve regeneration, not just maintenance, but active rebuilding of damaged myelin. Clinical evidence points to meaningful improvement in nerve conduction when adequate methylcobalamin is sustained over time. If you take away only one thing from today, let it be this: the form of B12 matters more than the dose. Alpha-lipoic acid is what I describe to my patients as the antioxidant that goes where others can't. Most antioxidants work in the fluid surrounding cells. Alpha-lipoic acid is both water and fat soluble, meaning it penetrates cell membranes and works directly inside the mitochondria of nerve cells, neutralizing the oxidative damage that has been accumulating there for decades. It is one of the most researched natural compounds for peripheral nerve support in the published literature. The studies are not small, and they are not preliminary. Researchers have observed measurable reductions in nerve pain and improvements in nerve function in subjects supplementing with alpha-lipoic acid. The mechanism is clear. Less oxidative damage means better mitochondrial function, which means nerve cells that have more energy for repair and signal transmission. Acetyl L-carnitine works alongside alpha-lipoic acid at the cellular energy level. It acts as a transport molecule, carrying fatty acids into the mitochondria so they can be converted into energy. For nerve cells that are already under stress from inflammation and deficiency, this additional fuel is not a luxury. Studies suggest that acetyl L-carnitine supports the energy production that damaged nerves need to begin the repair process, and that it may directly stimulate the growth of new nerve fibers in certain conditions. This is what the research increasingly suggests about the peripheral nervous system. Given the right conditions, it is not as static as we once believed. Benfotiamine is the fat-soluble form of vitamin B1, thiamine, and the distinction matters enormously for anyone dealing with glucose-related nerve damage. Standard thiamine doesn't penetrate nerve tissue effectively. Benfotiamine does. It has been studied in European clinical settings for decades, specifically for its role in protecting nerves from the kind of damage caused by elevated blood glucose. Researchers have observed that benfotiamine blocks several of the biochemical pathways through which glucose damages nerve tissue. For anyone with diabetes, prediabetes, or simply a history of elevated blood sugar, and that is a very large portion of people over 60, benfotiamine is not optional. It is, in my view, essential. Magnesium is involved in over 300 biological processes, including the regulation of calcium channels in nerve cell membranes. When calcium enters nerve cells in excessive amounts, which happens when magnesium is deficient, it creates a state of hyperexcitability. This is experienced as heightened pain sensitivity, cramping, and those spontaneous electric sensations that seem to have no physical trigger. Most people over 60 are chronically deficient in magnesium. The depletion happens gradually through diet, medication use, and reduced absorption. Clinical evidence points clearly to magnesium deficiency as a significant contributor to nerve pain amplification, meaning that even if your nerve damage is being managed, inadequate magnesium makes every symptom worse. Vitamin D3 is not typically thought of as a nerve nutrient, but what researchers are now discovering is that vitamin D receptors are present throughout the nervous system, including in the cells that produce myelin. Deficiency in vitamin D has been linked to increased nerve sensitivity and pain, and the majority of adults over 60, especially in northern states and during winter months, are significantly deficient. The interaction between vitamin D and nerve health is an active area of research, but the emerging picture is consistent. Optimizing vitamin D levels appears to support the anti-inflammatory environment that nerve repair requires. Now, finding each of these compounds separately, in the correct forms, the correct doses, and the combinations that the research supports, is genuinely difficult. Most people over 60 don't have the time or the background to navigate that. I've left a link in the description to a formula that brings all of this together in the forms I've described. I've reviewed it carefully, and it's one of the few options I feel comfortable recommending. I want to spend a moment on something that bothers me deeply about the current medical system. Not because I'm attacking the physicians in it, most of whom are dedicated and genuinely trying to help, but because you deserve to understand why this information hasn't reached you through conventional channels. The medical system is structured around interventions that can be standardized, prescribed, and billed. Natural nutritional interventions don't fit that structure. There's no patent on methylcobalamin. There's no pharmaceutical company funding large clinical trials for alpha-lipoic acid. The research exists, it's published in peer-reviewed journals, but it doesn't get translated into clinical guidelines the way drug research does. And so millions of people over 60 are suffering from something that has meaningful, evidence-based nutritional solutions, while being offered only drugs that manage symptoms without addressing the underlying mechanism. This isn't a conspiracy, it's a system problem, and the result is that millions of people are suffering unnecessarily. You are not powerless here. I want you to hold on to that. Your peripheral nervous system has a capacity to respond to proper support that most people in your situation have never been told about. The research points consistently in that direction. The patients I've worked with who have given their bodies the specific support they were missing, in the right forms consistently over time, many of them have experienced changes they didn't believe were possible after years of being told nothing could be done. And remember what I said at the beginning, those 7 plants and the herbs and the natural remedies you've tried, they are doing something real. The compounds in them are biologically active, but they are working at the surface. They are not reaching the myelin. They are not restoring B12 levels that have been depleted for years. They are not neutralizing oxidative damage inside the mitochondria of your nerve cells. Now you understand why the relief has always been temporary, and now you understand what needs to happen alongside them for the picture to actually change. If today's video opened your eyes to something important, share it with someone you care about. Because there are millions of people over 60 dealing with this silently, and they don't have to. The link in the description goes directly to the natural formula I recommend. Take a look when you have a quiet moment. Subscribe for more critical health information every week. And leave a comment below. What was the most surprising thing you learned today? I read every single one.